He opened a whole can of dog food but only gave the dog a small spoonful. Looking at the pitifully small amount of food in the bowl, the dog couldn't help but feel dejected. Little did it know, the owner just licked the spoon with dog food on it, then put the whole can back in the refrigerator. Looking at the few cans left in the refrigerator, Finch reluctantly swallowed his saliva. Finally, he resolutely closed the refrigerator door. Forcing down his hunger, he drank some tap water to fill his stomach. Looking at the dog who was hesitant to start eating, Finch told him not to worry about him. "I already ate my fill outside just now." Only then did the dog feel relieved and devour the food. But everything Finch said was a lie. Even when drinking water, he only took a small sip and savored it carefully. Because the world outside was already filled with yellow sand. A solar storm in 2026 destroyed the Earth's surface. Survivors had no choice but to hide underground to live. The solar storm severely damaged the ozone layer, causing not only a sharp rise in ultraviolet radiation on Earth, but also ridiculously high temperatures on the surface. Gradually, due to the harsh external environment and scarcity of resources, very few survivors remained. Finch is a researcher. He happened to be in the experimental base when the storm broke out. So he was lucky enough to survive. In order to survive, Finch often has to wear heavy protective suits and take a robotic dog to go out and find food. He has searched almost every building in the city. Due to long-term outdoor activities, his physical condition is deteriorating. Although he is not afraid of facing death at all, he always can't let go of the dog that depends on him for life. So he used all his knowledge to create a robot specifically to take care of the dog. Although the initial process went smoothly, the robot's torso and limbs are all formed. But it still lacks the most important two eyes. He searched the entire city but couldn't find them. In desperation, Finch had to call the robotic dog over. The robotic dog seemed to have spirituality. Thinking it was going out again, it appeared particularly excited. But it didn't expect its owner to reach for its eyes. Finch promised to get it new ones. Then dragged its chin and took out the eyes. In an instant, the robotic dog seemed to have completed its mission, and slowly lowered its head. Immediately after, Finch installed the eyes on the robot. Then he transmitted a large amount of dog-raising information to him. Not only taught him how to walk, but also taught him how to communicate effectively. Finally, he issued 4 key instructions. Cannot harm humans. Cannot stand idly by when humans are in danger. Most importantly, when Finch is not around, be sure to protect the dog's safety. Among them, the 4th instruction supersedes all other instructions. Looking at the robot who could fully understand and respond fluently, Finch was as moved as if looking at his newborn son. But just as the father and son were exchanging feelings, the base where they were hiding suddenly lost power. Panicked Finch immediately came to the top of the power-generating windmill. It was just a minor problem. After some adjustments, the windmill resumed rotation, and the base's power supply also returned to normal. Just as he turned around to go back, he was frightened and his hair stood on end by a scene in the distance. A boundless superstorm was rapidly approaching. Thunder rumbled, lightning flashed. According to the robot's prediction, this storm will arrive within 24 hours, and will last for at least 40 days. But his current food can't even last for 3 days. And he can't go out to collect supplies during that time. Finch decisively took out the fruit cans he had treasured for the longest time. Took a big bite, enjoying every bit of sweetness. Then Finch's spirits lifted greatly. He judged that now he could only move towards San Francisco. The storm is weakest there. Maybe they can survive it. And San Francisco has always been his dream place. That red bridge, a passage walked through in dreams. Time is pressing. He began to collect all available supplies. This was the busiest day in the base since the storm. The robotic dog heard this and wanted to help. But without eyes, it could only bump around everywhere. Seeing this scene, Finch remembered his promise to the robotic dog. Since the base can no longer be lived in, then the surveillance cameras are also useless. So he decisively took it off and installed it on the robotic dog. Although there was only one, it was enough. After all preparations were completed, the 2 humans and 2 dogs began their escape journey. A perfect RV is their last fortress. Finch not only has to be wary of other survivors, but also teach the newborn robot how to survive. The places they passed along the way were all barren. The once fertile land covered with flowers is now covered with sand and dust, leaving nothing behind. I don't know how long they traveled. They finally arrived at the next city. After a brief rest, Finch decided to teach the robot how to search for supplies. But the robot who just came to this world is like an energetic naughty child, curious about everything around him. Finch could only tell him with some helplessness, "What you should care about most now is whether there is anything to eat." Then they came to a theater. The door here was tightly locked. And there were no signs of it being pried open. Finch tried for a long time but couldn't open the lock. Finally, the robot stepped forward and directly tore down the entire door. After entering the door, facing things he had never seen before, the robot kept asking questions non-stop. Suddenly, he became silent when passing by a mirror. This was the first time he saw his own appearance. In an instant, it seemed like he had his own self-awareness. But he quickly detached himself again. Because Finch found a bag of corn kernels. So he couldn't wait to show him a fun thing. Finch found a pot lid and handed it to the robot. When the corn kernels were poured into the pot lid, they immediately turned into popcorn. This situation made the robot stomp his feet excitedly. But just as they were having fun, a huge tornado struck again quickly. At first, Finch wanted to quickly find a shelter. But no matter how fast they drove, they still couldn't shake off the tornado behind them. Finch realized that if they continued to drive like this, they would eventually be swallowed by the tornado. So he decisively stopped the car. Then got out of the car and took out long nails and a rope, ready to fix the RV directly in place. But due to physical weakness and being at high altitude, when fixing the fourth nail, Finch was already too weak to hammer the nail into the ground. Fortunately, the robot took action in time at this moment. It turned out that in this short period of time, he had already learned how to operate. He told Finch to quickly get into the RV to take shelter. And he stayed behind to clean up. Finch also followed his advice. After returning to the car and hiding the dog, he sealed all the windows with iron sheets. At this time, the tornado was less than 300 meters away. But the robot was still desperately tightening the ropes outside. Seeing that time was running out, Finch had to shout for him to get in the car quickly. The robot jumped into the car at the last moment before the storm came. However, before they could finish, the RV began to shake violently. Then the steel cables that were not firmly fixed began to break. First one, then the second and third. Then the entire RV was blown into the air. If the fourth one unfortunately breaks, they would all be buried in the storm. Fortunately, the last remaining fourth one held on to the end. After everything completely calmed down, Finch put on a protective suit and got out of the car to check the situation. And found that this was the one the robot risked his life to reinforce at the end. It could be said that he owed this little guy a life. Good job. Although they survived the storm, the tires were damaged in the fall. A robot immediately pushed over a spare tire. But Finch said that without a jack, it was impossible to replace it. But he obviously forgot the robot's strength. One hand is enough to support the entire car body. In this way, with the help of the robot, Finch quickly changed the tire. After this storm, the robot contributed greatly. Finch planned to give him a nice name. The robot stomped his feet excitedly after hearing this. Finch wanted to call him Jack. But the robot thought that was the name of a tool. Then the robot said many names of great people, such as Van Gogh, Shakespeare. But they were all rejected by Finch one by one. Finch suddenly felt again, what's the use of us two having names? However, after some thought, the robot gave another, Jeff. And this name surprised Finch. Jeff thought the name was simple and nice. And it didn't sound like a dog's name. But in the end, Finch's consent was still needed. Finch told him that it was completely unnecessary. Then he sincerely extended a hand to greet him. Welcome to the world, Jeff. As the soft morning light dyed the sky, the solar panels on the roof automatically opened. Finch woke up from a noisy sound. It turned out that Jeff thought the dog didn't like him. So he planned to learn dog language by imitating dog barks. As a result, he was told that this language simply did not exist. And the reason why the dog showed unfriendliness to him was because it hadn't built trust with him yet. Jeff didn't understand what trust was, but Finch didn't know how to explain it either. He could only start the car and continue on the road. But not long after, Finch suddenly started coughing violently. For safety, and to prevent Jeff from worrying, he parked the car near an abandoned restaurant, ready to go down alone to recover his condition. And also let Jeff and the dog build some trust. Because the car door was directly facing the gas station's canopy, so Finch didn't wear a protective suit when getting out of the car. However, just as he was coughing uncontrollably in the restaurant, the dog's frantic barking came from outside. It turned out that Jeff wanted to take the dog out of the car. But the dog, who didn't trust him, resolutely refused. Jeff had no choice but to personally lead the dog out. And let Jeff stay outside alone to guard the RV. When he saw them, one human and one dog, walking in, Jeff suddenly felt disappointed. Like a deflated balloon. Feeling unconvinced in his heart, he would clench his fists, and then peek at Finch through the car window again. Then he sat in the driver's seat and fiddled with the car. Just when Finch, who had recovered, was chatting with the dog, he saw the car outside driving past the window. Frightened, he quickly rushed to the kitchen door to check the situation. Hearing Finch's shout, Jeff jumped out of the car. But regarding why the car moved, Jeff didn't admit that he started it. Finch immediately realized that the situation was not good. But he didn't dare to get angry. He could only suppress his temper and use a soothing tone to ask Jeff to bring the protective suit over. At first, Jeff agreed readily. After getting in the car, he didn't forget to playfully interact with Finch. But the next second, he started the engine again and reversed the car until it crashed into a pillar and stopped. This frightened Finch. Jeff, unaware, even called himself an excellent driver. At this time, Finch's anger reached its peak. He didn't speak, but put his hand in the sunlight. The scorching sunlight instantly scorched his palm and made it smoke. He used his own pain to tell Jeff, "Creating you is for you to help me take care of the dog. All of this. The premise is that you have to be obedient and do as I say." Jeff lowered his head in disappointment after hearing this. A hint of guilt seemed to appear on his metallic face. He didn't dare to speak until he got in the car, curling up his body and hiding in a corner. And at this time, Finch also realized, as a father figure, facing the child's personality growth, he should be more patient and gentle. So he decided to personally teach Jeff to drive. And Jeff was also very smart and talented. He quickly mastered the knack of driving. Not only that, in order to make Finch happy, he would also honk the horn with his head from time to time, adding a touch of joy to the boring and tedious journey. As Jeff drove more and more steadily, Finch's face unconsciously revealed a kind old father's kindness. Even when looking at the other's eyes, they were filled with relief and affection. He hoped that in the limited time, he could teach Jeff all the survival skills and principles, so that when he leaves, there will be no more worries. And in order to achieve this goal as soon as possible, he began to seize every opportunity to guide Jeff. That night, they sat around a bonfire and talked heart to heart. Overhead was the magnificent and gorgeous aurora. If this was the Alaskan sky in the past, Finch would be exceptionally happy. Because before the southern hemisphere descended, only Alaska would have auroras almost every night. But now, because the ozone layer has been damaged, auroras can be seen in many places at night. But such auroras make people not want to appreciate them anymore, because it is exchanged for human freedom and the withering of nature. Jeff still doesn't understand melancholy. He is just curious, if sunlight is dangerous and you can't go out, then why not move at night? Finch became excited after hearing this. Although natural disasters are dangerous, they can be predicted. And as long as they can be predicted, there will be countermeasures. But the night is full of unpredictable crises, such as hungry humans hiding in the dark. Who knows when they will come out and give you a fatal blow? So you must never trust anyone. Otherwise, you will definitely lose your life. Jeff tried to ask why after hearing this. But Finch didn't answer directly. Instead, he murmured to himself as if talking to himself, "When you face things you can't control, your emotions will fluctuate. And the way you deal with this matter will define what kind of person you are." Looking at Finch's gradually reddening eyes, Jeff seemed to have guessed something. But he didn't choose to continue asking. Instead, after Finch returned to the RV, he pondered alone from night to dawn, until he heard the dogs barking before regaining consciousness, and hurriedly ran back to the car. It turned out that Finch's condition was getting worse. It had reached the point of coughing blood and having a high fever. Watching him curl up on the bed in pain, Jeff immediately mobilized the programs in his mind, searching for ways to relieve the patient's pain. Then, following the instructions, he carefully placed a wet towel on Finch's forehead. Soon Finch fell asleep, and Jeff drove the car to continue heading towards San Francisco. At this moment, he was like a grown-up child, carrying all the responsibilities on his shoulders. I don't know how long it took. They arrived at another abandoned city. After parking the car, Jeff found that Finch was still not awake. But he didn't disturb him. Instead, he called the robotic dog to get out of the car together, ready to search for supplies. Because of the previous experience, this time Jeff quickly locked onto a supermarket. After scavenging, he found a coat. Then he couldn't wait to put it on his body, because he had always wanted to dress up like a human. Then he pried open a locked cabinet, and found that it contained a large number of medicines and canned food. Thinking that these were all things that Finch urgently needed, Jeff was so happy that he danced with joy. But at this moment, Finch on the other side suddenly woke up in shock. When he found that Jeff was not there, he ignored his physical weakness, forced himself to put on a protective suit and rushed out. As a lone wolf struggling to survive in the apocalypse, Finch could keenly smell the scent of danger. But when he rushed to the supermarket, it was still one step too late. The robotic dog luckily found a box of biscuits. Canned food is already extremely precious. Biscuits are even more invaluable. However, lacking an owner, he would not sense danger. When he entered the trap, he was directly crushed by the bear trap. Finch, hearing the sound, rushed over. The broken mechanical sound was like an infant's cries. He might be in extreme pain, but he still tightly clutched his beloved toy ball. Finch looked at the parts scattered on the ground in disbelief. Finally, he endured the pain and turned off his power. This time, he really completed his mission. Finch could only immediately go to find Jeff. He had already lost one, he couldn't lose everything. Jeff was still searching intact. Not only did he not realize that he was in danger, but even when he saw Finch, he innocently showed off his new coat. Although he was both anxious and angry, Finch didn't dare to say much. Because staying for one more second means one more point of danger. The two immediately set off and returned to the RV, and drove away from here as soon as possible. Little did they know that they had already been targeted by survivors. Their car had just started to leave, when the car hidden in the dark started. Due to being too physically weak, Finch handed the car over to Jeff after getting in. And he quickly prepared his gun and bullets. But just as he was preparing all this, he fainted. When he woke up again, it was already dark. The other party was still chasing them relentlessly. Because in the apocalypse, violence is the rule. Human meat is also an opportunity to continue living. In order to get rid of the pursuers behind, Finch first asked Jeff to turn off the headlights. Fortunately, his eyes have night vision function. Then he asked Jeff to step on the accelerator hard. When the other party's view was blocked by the road behind, Finch turned the steering wheel sharply and turned the car off the main road. Intending to hide under the bridge to avoid them, unexpectedly, the modified solar panels exceeded the height limit. Seeing that the pursuers were about to arrive, their car was stuck here and could not move. At this critical moment, Jeff ignored Finch's obstruction and jumped out of the car directly. Then he used all his strength in the second before the other party arrived, successfully pushed the car under the bridge. Only then did they escape the pursuers without any danger. Finch got out of the car and picked up a piece of debris. And looked at the roof that was already out of shape again. Without solar power, how far can they run? He didn't know. Jeff also didn't know. Finch vented all his anger on Jeff, leaving Jeff helplessly stunned there, not knowing what to do. The drizzle of rain slowly drew the curtain, as if to draw a full stop to this performance. But soon he plucked up his courage and returned to the car. Even though you said you can't easily trust others, but I still trust you from the bottom of my heart. Finch only smiled bitterly after hearing this. Then he told a story. When the disaster just started, the world fell into chaos. At that time, people would fight to the death for a bag of bread. He hid in the supermarket waiting for other survivors to leave, but he didn't remind the little girl who was also in the supermarket. The little girl walked out the door with a blank expression. Those brutal survivors, for supplies, didn't hesitate to kill the little girl ruthlessly. He was full of guilt, as if his conscience was about to kill him. He used the life of a little girl to exchange for his own safety. When he came out, everything had returned to calm. But a sound came from the little girl's school bag. It turned out that the little girl's dog was hiding inside. In order to make up for his guilt towards the little girl, he has been raising this dog ever since. But that scene has become his nightmare. Hunger can turn people into murderers, but it turned him into a coward. That is a scar that can never be erased, and also a sharp sword that constantly warns him not to degenerate. And this is also why he, knowing that his time is running out, insisted on creating Jeff, to replace him and continue to take care of the dog. Jeff has really grown into a responsible person in a short period of time, and has a sense of responsibility. After one night, Jeff drove on the road again. At this time, they were still 772 kilometers away from San Francisco. For Jeff, this is hope. However, when he turned his head, wanting to tell this good news to Finch who was resting in the back, a butterfly suddenly hit the windshield. Jeff, who didn't understand, was frightened and immediately stopped the car. Finch also immediately came over to check the situation. When he opened the car door handle and tentatively reached out to the sunlight, he was not burned as before. Finch got out of the car in disbelief. He didn't know whether the ozone layer here was not damaged originally, or whether the earth was self-repairing. But he knew without protective clothing, his body the feeling of being surrounded by sunlight again is like being thrown into the warm embrace of a mother. Just as he was wantonly feeling the breeze caressing his face, a butterfly lightly danced to his fingertip, inviting him to appreciate this regained world together. And Jeff also learned from Finch's appearance. First, he looked up at the sky silently. Then shook his mechanical body, as if he really empathized with the joy of mankind. To celebrate this long-lost freedom, Finch put on a brand new white suit and wore an elegant gentleman's white top hat. And sat with Jeff under a parasol, eating canned food while chatting leisurely. Jeff said, "I found a postcard in the car. There is also a message and signature from your father inside. Can you tell me what this story is about?" Finch didn't want to reveal his father's affairs, because this has always been a regret in his heart. But now he doesn't have much time left, and he doesn't want to take this regret to another world. So after a moment of silence, he opened his mouth. It turned out that since Finch was born, he had never seen his father, who left home for work. Until his 15th birthday, he received this postcard of the Golden Gate Bridge. From then on, he looked forward to meeting his father one day. For this reason, he also specially bought this expensive suit. But to this day, his father has not appeared. Finch thought of traveling around the world, but because of health and work reasons, he has never walked out of Missouri. Finch felt that this was not living. It's like you can hear others say how long the Golden Gate Bridge is, how high and how majestic it is, but only when you really stand on the bridge. Listening to the sound of the suspension cables echoing in the wind is the real experience, is the real living. Jeff listened, and excitedly suggested, "We can set off now. In 18 hours, we can stand on the Golden Gate Bridge." And last night, I even flashed in my mind the scene of the three of us standing side by side on the Golden Gate Bridge, watching the sun rise from the clouds. But Finch didn't show a trace of excitement after hearing this. Instead, he said calmly, "I'm going to die." In a moment of silence, Jeff was stunned. He obviously never had a heart, but at this moment, he had the feeling of heartache. However, what Finch was most worried about was the dog. So he once again asked Jeff to take good care of the dog. And Jeff nodded silently. Then, under Finch's demonstration, he played with the dog. With a toy ball. However, every time he threw the ball out, the dog would deliberately bypass him and hand the ball back to Finch. Even if Jeff blocked between them, it was of no avail. After several attempts, Jeff was very discouraged. He thought the dog didn't trust him. But Finch said that building trust takes time. You can slowly get along in the future. However, just after saying these words, he coughed violently. And blood also stained the cherished suit red. His time really seemed to be running out. Seeing this, Jeff quickly helped him walk back to the RV. But Finch used his last bit of strength to break free. Then slowly stretched out his hands and held Jeff. And Jeff also seemed to feel the parting. Reluctantly nestled in Finch's chest. There are always some hugs that bring tears to your eyes. There is always some warmth blooming in the warm sunshine. But cold reality is always so cruel. After reluctantly and gratifyingly taking the last look at Jeff, Finch walked tremblingly onto the RV. The dog also followed behind, ready to accompany him through the last journey. And Jeff, after silently packing his luggage, sat alone in the sunset and pondered. He hoped that he at this moment was a cold-blooded machine without emotion. Because in this way, there would be no sadness in his heart. In the darkening desert, a few falling pieces hung on the ridge. Instead, the dog's wailing came from the RV. Echoing in this wilderness, wrapped in endless sorrow. Finch completely finished his lonely life. But Jeff did not immediately go over to check the situation. Instead, he silently looked at the direction of the RV. If he could shed tears at this moment, then the tears would surely be able to submerge the entire dune. After sorting out his mood, Jeff prepared a simple funeral for Finch. Watching the fire burning under the vast starry sky, Jeff put on his hat, as a solemn mourning, when the fire dissipated. Jeff learned from Finch's previous appearance. First, he filled the RV with fuel, then he tried to open a can to feed the dog. But because his fingers were too thick, he couldn't succeed no matter what. Just when he was at a loss, the machine on his chest suddenly sucked the can in. It turned out that Finch had thought of this problem long ago, so he installed parts to open cans in advance. However, after doing all these things, Jeff seemed to have lost direction. Sitting alone in front of the RV door, like a child waiting for guidance. Suddenly, the dog walked up to him and put the ball in his mouth beside him. It turned out that trust had always been there. And Jeff also picked up the ball as if picking up inheritance. At this moment, he finally knew where to go next. Just like that, Jeff drove the RV and set off again from dawn. Carrying Finch's last wish, and also carrying their shared wish. Jeff buried Finch's ashes next to the Golden Gate Bridge. There, the grass is green, butterflies surround it. And Jeff, like he once dreamed, stood on the Golden Gate Bridge as he wished. Looking at many photos left here for commemoration, he also left a postcard of a family of 3. Then took the dog and started a new life. Finch is directed by Miguel Sapochnik and Nick, starring Tom Hanks in the lead role, a science fiction film released in 2021. When the world collapses and the end of the world comes, humans begin to kill each other to resources, resulting in very few humans left on Earth. But the surviving Finch is willing to give up the only food he has all to a dog he raised from childhood. Not only that, because he is terminally ill with cancer, he also specially created a robot responsible for taking care of the dog in the future. The robot was just a cold machine that received instructions. But in the process of gradual imitation and learning, he not only possessed his own consciousness, but also possessed human perception and emotions. So much so that it brought a lot of trouble to Finch. But it was precisely in the quarrels and getting along with him, that Finch found an outlet to vent his inner feelings, so that he could forgive his once unbearable self before his death, and also experience the father-son relationship he had never felt before. After experiencing the complexity and darkness of human nature, Finch no longer believes that there is trust between people. He even repeatedly warned Jeff as a robot, not to easily trust anyone, otherwise, you may not even have a burial place. But Jeff, who is just starting out and inexperienced in the world, uses the most original kindness and warmth of human nature to repair the cracks of trust in Finch's heart. Let him see the world again before leaving the world, see the beautiful appearance the world should have. The end of the world is undoubtedly the best test of human nature, and also the best way to illuminate the extremes of human nature. Just like Dante described the gate of hell in the Divine Comedy, engraved with those who enter here, abandon all hope. Extreme environments are always the sharpest scalpel, throwing away the skin of civilized disguise, exposing the good and evil cells lurking in the human mechanism. But when resources are exhausted, triggering the primitive instinct of survival of the fittest, there are always people like the painters of the Mogyo grottos in Dunhuang, outlining the flying apsaras of hope on the broken walls. Because the most moving paradox of human nature lies in the closer to the spiritual desert at the end of the world, the more spiritual totems like oases can emerge. Just as Byron said in Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, though the night was made for sorrow, joy may peep out on the morrow. Those souls who guard the brilliance of humanity, even if they only exist between robots and animals, in the darkest moment, guard the brilliance of humanity, are exactly the fire of Prometheus left in the world, illuminating the tunnel to a new life. Today's movie recap sharing ends here. Welcome everyone to like, comment and forward. I am Movie Recap Online. Looking forward to meeting you next time.